Good afternoon. Hello. Hello. Can we all be seated? Fellow delegates, honorable members, can we all be seated? My name is Ntombazane Lesifuba, and I'll be chairing the next session. Our topic for discussion in this session is analysis of gender transformation in South Africa. Now, ordinarily, or in literal terms, the term gender refers to either male or a female. But because of the circumstances that are known to us, not only in the country, but universally, hence we have different platforms that have been created to debate and discuss, resolve on the issues of women-related transformation. We then try or choose to focus on women emancipation and empowerment. And I want to believe that the efforts to change gender and social norms to address inequalities remains a topical matter in our society and indeed universally. And the concept gender transformation is synonymous with equal rights and opportunities for all, irrespective of gender. Honorable members and delegates, I'm now going to introduce the moderator and the panelists who are going to help us to unpack this topic. We've got the moderator, Ms. Prex Govender. Ms. Prex Govender is a writer, a teacher, and an author. She served as a member of parliament from 1994 to 2002. She's the first chairperson of the Joint Monitoring Committee on the Quality of Life and Status of Women that ensured over 80% of gender transformative legislation which was enacted. She pioneered SA's gender responsive budget, proposing it in the 1994 budget debate, partnering with civil society researchers to produce the Women's Budget Initiative and ensuring impact on the 1998-1999 national budget. She served the South African Human Rights Commission as Commissioner and Deputy Chairperson. She chaired the Independent Assessment of Parliament and has worked locally and internationally. She has received several awards, including the International Association for Women's Rights in Development and honorary doctorates in law and philosophy. The next, that was, can we have an applause? That was Ms. Prex Govender, our moderator. And we are also, can I humbly call her to come forward, please? Not here yet? Sonny Kwabi. The next panelist, the panelist is Ms. P.S. Koka. Ms. Koka is the Chief Director of Poverty and Inequality Statistics at the Stats SA Division, located in the Department of Finance in South Africa. She is responsible for the production of multidimensional poverty statistics within the Poverty and Inequality at Stats SA Division. Can I welcome Ms. P.S. Koka forward, please? You can. And the next panelist is Ms. P. Naidu. Ms. P. Naidu is a part-time commissioner at the South African Commission for Gender Equality, appointed from 1st March 2023 to 28 February 2028. She is a law graduate and an admitted attorney who is a director at Subrasan Naidu Attorneys. Can I welcome Ms. Naidu? The next panelist is Dr. S. Mkwanazi. Dr. S. Mkwanazi is a gender activist and a demographer and senior researcher with health background. She was appointed by the President in 2021 as a commissioner of the National Planning Commission. Dr. Mkwanazi has worked as a consultant, offering specialized expertise in quantitative research to social scientists and health professions. She's a recipient of the National Research Foundation Fellowship and the South African Humanities Deans Association Fellowship. She is currently involved in numerous international collaborative research projects investigating gender-based violence, as well as sexual and reproductive health and rights. Can I welcome Dr. Mkwanazi forward, please? And the last panelist is Dr. Mbava. My apologies for that. Dr. Mbava is the chairperson of the Finance and Fiscal Commission of South Africa. She has served various South African entities with organizational development, strategy, monitoring and evaluation, and is a governance specialist. She is also a board member of the South African Monitoring and Evaluation Association. Dr. Mbava. Honorable members, delegates, I will now hand over to our moderator to proceed.
So, am I speaking from here or from there? What is most useful? Right here. Excellent. There are many. Thank you very much for inviting me to moderate this panel today, and to my panelists, many of whom I'm meeting here on the stage. The question of which is what this panel is supposed to do, is analyze gender transformation in South Africa. And before we go to each panelist, I'd like to just take a moment for the entire room to do a little reflection on what I think it was the Honourable Speaker of KZN asked us to do when she brought to memory Comrade Victoria Mkenge. And I'd like you all for a moment to bring to memory someone who reminds you, who reminded you of the critical need to transform our country and to transform the lived reality of the majority of people in our country, the majority of whom are Black, are women, and I'm using the word Black in the term in which, the ways in which it was used in the period in which we fought against apartheid, which I learned from comrades such as Victoria. the fact that we were fighting the apartheid state, not just as a brutally racist state, but also as a capitalist state and a patriarchal state. Today we talk about intersectionality, about seeing the ways in which differences have been used as divisions, and the ways in which those differences have enabled people to persecute and exploit and destroy each other. So I'd like you to take a moment and to bring to mind an ancestor. Who reminds you of why it is we are sitting here today and why it is you are sitting where you are sitting in your legislatures across this country. Our Constitution talks about the right to inherent dignity. It means it is our birthright. It is what we are born with. And it is in every single one of us. But the institutions in which we work are difficult to transform. The Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly reminded me about Parliament and getting there and not finding toilets for women. May seem like something trivial, but when I was in the Human Rights Commission, we had a campaign called and hearings across every province. And it was entitled, Water is Life, Sanitation is Dignity. And so dignity, the right to inherent dignity, is not just a value, it's a substantive human right. And what I'd like the panel to explore in terms of gender transformation is why it is in this year, 2023, in terms of all the statistics, and we will hear about the statistics from Stats SA, the worst impacted by poverty, by inequality, by unemployment and precarious employment are women who are Black, who are poor, who are in the rural parts, mainly the rural parts of South Africa, in the informal settlements, etc. So in terms of the institutions who are gathered here and the voices you represent and the knowledge bases you bring into this space, what is needed and what can parliaments do to transform the situation? How do you use your power as parliaments in terms of your oversight power and in terms of meaningful public participation? So that is not just about ticking the boxes, not just about saying we did X number of whatever it is. It's how has things changed and what is the measure of that change? So I'd like to get into the first panelist in terms of Stats SA. And I'm sorry, when you're in your 60s, I think you need several pairs of glasses. So I'd like to ask Ms. P.S. Coker, the Chief Director of Poverty and Inequality Stats essay to address that question from the perspective of the statistics that you look at in terms of poverty and inequality, but also in terms of, because if we're looking at inequality, we have to look at wealth, and we have to look at wealth creation and how the system of wealth creation increases or deepens that poverty. How does it require unemployment and precarious employment for that system to work? It's not just that it's by accident, it's by design, that globally precarious employment amongst women has increased across the world, not just in our country. So Stats essay, over to you in relation to that question.
Thank you. Okay, before I start with answering the question posed to Statistics South Africa, I would like to say that I heard yesterday a talk like legislation, budget, which is the fiscus, and then policy. So to that, I would like to add and say legislation, the fiscus, measurement, and policy. So measurement, that's where Stats SA comes in. So measurement is important where policy is, because from where policy is, as measurement, we can get the targets, and those targets, we can then take them home to Stats SA and measure them so that in fora like this, we can come and present progress of those targets. So of the 5 objectives that I see of the summit, we not only talking to progress, but we also going to take away the targets, the gender transformational targets, so that we go and measure them and be able to next round come up with progress with regards to those targets. So in South Africa, we are measuring poverty in 2 ways. We've got 2 measurements. We've got what we call monetary poverty as well as multidimensional poverty. So those 2, they are not competing, but they are complementing one another. So when coming to monetary poverty, we look at using 3 poverty lines: the food poverty line, the upper bound poverty line, and the lower bound poverty line. So government has made official the lower bound poverty line. And according to that line, we started with poverty rate nationally of about 53% of the people of South Africa living below that line. So today, we are standing at 42%. There is some progress, but I would say the progress is slow. I think from the concept note that we had received on page 5, it's indicated that, to close the gap between men and women, females and males, is gonna, we're gonna see those benefits in 2021-86, about 118 years. So it's a snail pace. There is some progress, but yes, it's very slow. So when looking at the females, we always see females being, in terms of poverty, high poverty levels that are higher than the national rates, that are also higher than the male rates of poverty. And then when going to multidimensional poverty, there we're not looking at money. We are looking at the dimensions that are looking at the access to basic services. So meaning we're looking at deprivations. And then that multidimensional poverty measurement, it has gained a lot of traction internationally, because most governments, they like it because it tends to give sort of how government interventions had worked for our people, looking at the social wage. So in terms of that, we have made beautiful, significant strides as well. We see our people having access to basic services, that electricity, water, decent sanitation. So in terms of that also, we started at a high of 20% of people living in acute poverty, which is they are deprived. And then that has decreased to 7%. Currently, there is progress. We are moving somewhere, but it's a very slow progress. And then we move to inequality. So even there, women are still lagging behind. You know, they have high acute poverty rates that are higher than the national as well as male acute poverty. And then moving to inequality, we see that females, their median income per capita, it's very low compared to the male incomes. So we see the women, they earn 53% lesser than males. And then that also, we see that there's some increase in incomes over the years, but women are still lagging behind, behind in terms of comparisons nationally as well as males. But what I would like to say now is that we have what we call income and expenditure survey that is in the field that is going to help us to see currently in terms of 2023 where we are standing in terms of the monetary poverty and in terms of income. Would we see income still being of males still being 53% higher than that of females, or are we progressing? Are we going to see that lesser when looking at the results of 2023 IES? And then, there are challenges. I think there's a question for this part of the session where it's talking about challenges. So the challenges that we're facing is that the income and expenditure surveys that are used to measure monetary poverty, they are expensive. They are heavy on the fiscus. And then one other challenge is that the multidimensional poverty we're talking about here, it's depending on the decennial censuses and the 5-year in-between community surveys. So given that, there's one thing that I think it would be sort of a recommendation that I would like to put forth. So I had indicated that there has been progress, but remember there are external shocks. External shocks meaning things like COVID-19 that has hit us so hard, as well as other countries globally. It's a shock that comes and can quickly and easily reverse the gains that we have seen in terms of the progress that we are seeing with regards to poverty. So things like that should be taken into account, because even though the gains we are seeing, like reduced poverty, so when those external shocks hit us, some years you find that poverty, it rises, as well as inflation, which also affects the monetary part of poverty. So those are the challenges that we have. But when coming to now the sort of recommendations, legislation reforms, they are very critical, they are very important. And then Status A, it's where it is because we have the Status Act number 6 of 1999, which is where SALS comes in. So we are mandated by the acts, which are the legislation. So where we are sitting now in the country, South Africa, we have a whole lot of wealth of data sitting with other sector departments, which we call administrative data. And this data, it needs to be explored. And before we can explore and harness it, it has to be accessed. And I think legislature as the engine, the heart of the country, can assist there in terms of, legislative reforms, which would assist us to access that kind of data, because if we get access to the data, meaning that some of the statistics that we produce, we can get them from the admin sources. And then meaning in that way, then we will then lessen the weight that we put on the fiscus in terms of surveys. So if we can start from there, going forward, I think that that will be wonderful, and then we will relieve some sort of pressure on our fiscus. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Koka. And I think that you've raised specific things for the legislatures to consider. We'll come back to it at the end of the panel. If we can move on then to Ms. P. Naidu, Commissioner for Gender Equality. And I think in relation to the Commission for Gender Equality, I think I'd like to perhaps raise a question around the role of the Commission. And I think the work of the Commission, what it's been able to do, how is Parliament, how can Parliament play a role to take forward your reports and ensure that there's implementation of critical areas of investigation that the Commission has engaged in. So what is your, I think in terms of the questions around policy incoherence and the ways in which we have advanced in terms of legislation, for example, the Constitution, in terms of gender equality. And on the other hand, we have other policies which increase inequality. So, for example, if you see food as a human right, or if you see water as a human right, there's a very different approach to it than seeing it as commodities to be sold to the highest bidder. So I'd like you to perhaps look at gender in terms of intersectionality, in terms of the realities of the lives of people in our country, the lives of women in our country, and what makes women vulnerable, and what is needed to shift that.
Thank you very much. I would like to start off by saying that, one of the visions of the Commission for Gender Equality is that we want to see a country where the development of women and women within intersecting identities are at the epicenter. We want to see women's economic power. And Madam Speaker, I hear you when you say that we shouldn't be wanting to account to anyone if we want another cent after we've asked for 2 cents. And the reason we are in that position, Madam Speaker, is because women are not financially and economically empowered, and we need to address that. And what we would like to see is an economy inclusive of all women, with rural women being our focus point. And we are not just looking at public sectors. We're also looking at private sectors to put transformation of women within their strategies and have that as a direction and focal point. Judge President, I heard you when you said that there has been a 41% representation of women in the legal fraternity. I put it to you, Judge President, that in our 29 years of democracy is not adequate. We should be sitting at a level of 50% representation of all genders. One of the visions of our society, Madam Moderator, is that we want to see a society free of gender-based violence and femicide. Many women are targeted because we have careers, and to a man that is not good enough because they still firmly believe in the patriarchal system of where a woman cannot do what a man is supposed to do. And this is what we're looking at. We're looking at transformation, and we're going to be looking at the various levels of not just the public sector, but the private sector, of how you deal with transformations. We will be inviting the various levels of both the private and public centers to transformation hearings. We will be making our recommendations in our reports, and we would want the support of national government in implementing the findings and our recommendations. Another issue that we would be focusing on is that there's a huge emphasis on prioritizing sexual reproductive health for the improvement of both not just women, but also young ladies. Colleagues, Madam Speaker, teenage pregnancy is yet another pandemic. It's a pandemic or it's a pandemic unfolding before our very eyes. And sexual reproductive health is such an important aspect. Currently, and I'm sure my colleague at Stats SA will bear me out when I say unemployment amongst Black women is sitting at 51%. We need legislation in place. We need the different levels of government and our legislature to assist us in eradicating the unemployment of Black women. Ways that we can look at to improve our various levels and legislations is training of gender equality frameworks to have a better understanding of gender mainstreaming. Madam Speaker, when you speak about engaging with civil society plays such an important role in our country because they are the ones who are able to tell us exactly what the problem is. We sitting here, we have no idea as to what really unfolds at ground zero. And that is why the engagement of civil society plays such a vital role in us achieving gender transformation. We also need to go through the legislature, government as a whole needs to go through planning and budgeting, monitoring and evaluation in all spheres of government. On a last note, Madam Moderator, I would like the legislature to consider inviting the Commission to Gender Equality to have a seat in their legislative oversight committee that is responsible for the oversight of the Office of the Premier in terms of accountability. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much. And the Commission for Gender Equality. And I think there's a couple of points that we will take further in the discussion of the panel and with the audience. I'd like to then move to Dr. Mkonazi from the Commissioner for the National Planning Commission. And I suppose the National Planning Commission has a very critical role in our country and in terms of transformation and in terms of gender transformation and how that links to the issues around inequality, gender inequality, which the Commission's just talked about, but also wealth and income inequality, because I think those are quite critical in terms of the intersection between those is critical. So if you would speak to your objectives, how far you feel, which are the key ones, which ones you've met, and what do you think Parliament's and the legislature's role is in relation to ensuring that those objectives are supported, are met? Thank you.
I think I'd like to start by reminding us in the room what our mandate is as a National Planning Commission. So according to the revised Green Paper, General Notice 101 of 2010, the National Planning Commission is really an independent think tank responsible for advising the executive, the president, cabinet on long-term development plans. In addition to this, we appointed by the president to assist in the nation around the national development plan, in marketing it, making it sexy, making sure that everyone knows about it. But in addition to that, since I began my term in 2021, I have been working very closely. I have been working very closely with the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation to monitor and evaluate development indicators. So I have a background in demography. I started as a dentist. I don't like mentioning that because people like to hold on to that. I'm no longer a dentist. I don't take out teeth. I'm now a demographer. Okay. So I am a numbers person. I am a social scientist. And I look at populations and how populations can help in the development of a country, right? And because of that, I help DPME very closely to monitor and evaluate the development indicators that are there, that are targets for the National Development Plan. There's no point in us having targets and not seeing whether we are going up or going down, going forwards or going backwards, right? So specifically as the third and current National Planning Commission, our mandate is to mobilize society to promote the acceleration in implementing the National Development Plan towards 2030. We are now 7 years away. Assist in forging a conversation among key stakeholders. We do this quite a lot, having bargaining power, leading to effective and impactful social compacts on several key issues facing the country. We also undertake research and build a body of evidence on critical matters for the long-term planning and development of South Africa. Now, we're actually in the process of finalizing a 10-year review on the National Development Plan. And our approach as the NPC has been a gender mainstreaming approach to address women's development and the need for gender equality in the various chapters of the National Development Plan. Now, we know that women make up 50.39% of the population. So we are half of the population. And as the current National Planning Commission, we consider gender as a cross-cutting challenge. And therefore, these issues would be addressed as part of the overarching goals of the NDP. In other words, we don't have specific goals for women and targets for women in the National Development Plan, but we have targets for how we want unemployment to be decreased, how we want inequality to be decreased, how we want poverty to be decreased. And the assumption is that if women make up half of the population, then if we want a target of 20% reduction in unemployment, unemployment for women, the level of unemployment for women should also decrease by the same 20%. Does that make sense?
Yes.
100%? Good. So, however, the National Planning Commission, through the NDP 10-year review, finds that while there has been some progress, many challenges remain. So, for example, in general, the Black African women living in ex-homeland areas remains often especially disadvantaged. These are the rural women that my co-panelist was speaking about. Households led by lone mothers continue to bear an extra heavy burden. And also, school-going girls continue to experience challenges, not only in relation to teenage pregnancy, but also just in relation to sanitation. And that now speaks to their sexual and reproductive health and rights. So I don't want to go into the stats. Stats to say I was hoping that you were going to go much, much deeper into these stats, but anyway, it's fine. We'll talk about the stats another day. You know the stats, right? We know that amongst women, there are high levels of unemployment, there are high levels of poverty and food insecurity, and there are high levels of violence. We know this, okay? We don't need to know the percentages and numbers because whatever the percentage and number is, it's too high, okay? So I'm sick and tired personally of continuously spitting out the facts that we know. Because whether it's 30% of women that are affected by violence or 50% of women that are affected by violence, it's just too many women that are affected by violence, right? Okay. But an important driver to the discrepancies that are seen, particularly between the indicators that are present for men and women, I have found to be gender roles. And the problem with gender roles, ladies and gentlemen, is that actually gender roles are not gender roles. Gender roles are life skills. Because if you cannot cook, you will not eat. It's a life skill to cook. Otherwise, olamba. If you want to be hungry, that's fine. If you have money to buy KFC every day, that's fine. That's great. But if you don't know how to cook, you're fundamentally going to be disadvantaged as somebody else, whether they are male or female, who knows how to cook. So this thing of us continuously talking about gender roles is a problem because that then deepens the gender roles. I call gender roles. There's no such thing as just because I'm female doesn't mean that I should be able to know how to clean. Because in your area where you live, you should be able to keep that area clean. Whether you're male or you're female, or you're going to get sick. Let's go to recommendations so that I don't dwell on this point of gender roles, which you can see I'm very passionate about. So mainstreaming gender in development planning requires deliberate policy and planning attention to gender redistributive processes through, for example, the gender responsive planning and budgeting systems. It also requires annual gender audits. Stats say, we need your help, that provide accurate data on women's representation and voice in planning and decision making at national, provincial, and the local level. But here's the heart of the matter. We have all these beautiful, you know this statement, guys. We have these beautiful policies, but implementation does not occur on the ground. Now, 80% of the National Development Plan in 2012 was assumed that it was going to be implemented by a capable state. We have now realized as the National Planning Commission that the capable state did not exist in 2012. And from 2014 going forward, it was hollowed out by state capture. So even where we were in 2012, we are now at a worse off state than where we were in 2012 because of state capture and the corruption that has occurred. Therefore, we have actually realized as the NPC that continuing to talk about state-led implementation lacks credibility and is downright irresponsible. Specifically, we all know that while the government has policies and laws to promote, enforce, and monitor gender equality and development of vulnerable groups, implementation has been limited. Therefore, a new approach is needed. If something is not working, we need to change an approach. We can't keep on doing the same thing and expecting different results. Now, perhaps the recent pledge, I was hoping my slide would have been flighted by now, technical team. Now, perhaps the recent pledge by 115 businesses, right? 115 businesses recently made a pledge to partner with government. On the 27th of July 2023, 115 companies pledged commitment to build the country, to build South Africa. The pledge states, as South African business leaders, we firmly believe in the immense potential of our country. We are committed to building it and have come together to address the current challenges. Technical team, help me out. We are committed to building it and have come together to address the current challenges with the aim to achieving sustainable, inclusive economic growth. I would like legislations to actually listen to this, legislators to listen to this, because you're the ones who are going to hold businesses accountable to make sure that they do what they say they are going to do. Through strategic partnerships and focused interventions, we have the power to make a significant and positive impact on our nation, creating hope for all South Africans. We are resolutely committed to being a force for good. 115 companies, BP, Discovery, Shell, Hatch, KPMG, Deloitte, Mara technical team, young disappoint. Oh, it's there. Oh, 100%. Oh, thank you. Okay, right.
And it's
So these are, so I would like legislators to hold these CEOs of these 115 companies accountable. We can't do it as NPC. They are going to say, who are you? You dog who has no teeth. But you have teeth. You have laws that you can create. You have ways to ensure that if they don't keep to this pledge of theirs, we didn't go to them and force them to pledge. They decided to pledge. So let them take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mukanazi and the National Planning Commission. I think we'll definitely be coming back to the issue of how we hold business accountable. And I'm going to then move to Dr. P.N. Mbaba, the Chair of the Finance and Fiscal Commission. And I'm not sure we all need that.
I'm not sure if I think my mic works.
I think mine works as well. So I think there's, as I've been listening to all the presentations, one of the questions which actually the late Dr. Frini Junwala raised in a paper that I quoted at her memorial, which was around the question of women's contribution to reproducing society. And we've been talking a lot about the productive economy and women's participation in the productive economy. But the connection between the productive and the reproductive, and what the implications are, for example, when government cuts healthcare spending or education or care for children, people who are have disabilities, people who are sick, etc. Who takes care? Who does the burden shift to? And the burden shifts often to women who are expected to have infinitely elastic time. And of course, it's not possible. So the reality of the social repercussions of the lack of understanding of what happens when you cut your spending in particular sectors. What's the implications of that? What's the implications of a trade policy, for example, the General Agreement in Trade and Services that South Africa agreed to, and in the early 90s, saw a significant loss of women's jobs in the formal economy, particularly in the clothing and textile sector, in which I was a unionist. So the issue of understanding those implications and how the Finance and Fiscal Commission addresses those, addresses the gaps in, because we often talk about the budgets, and the budget's really a statement of economic policy priorities. Whose lives are valued, whose work is valued, who and what is valued, and who is not, and what is not. And so that taking for granted that women will catch the fallout instead of ensuring that we have universal health care, that we have the basic income grant, etc. There are a whole range of policies that are critical to ensuring that we shift the inequality and the poverty. And the reality of women being trapped, the vast majority of women in our country being trapped in the poorest parts of our country, in the informal settlements, in the parts of rural South Africa, which are not even completely off the radar. So, as the Financial and Fiscal Commission, how are you advising government to look at that policy incoherence, and what is the role of parliaments in being able to support and strengthen that to ensure gender equality is not really just about measuring how many middle class or wealthy women are now equal to men, but also what's the vast majority of women in our country, what's their lives like? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. I think you've captured it quite well. I think the budget can be a tool that as a country we use for social transformation. If you look at any country's budget allocation, it gives you a picture of what we value as a country. And the legislature, parliament, has the tools, has the ability to hold the executive accountable when they present their budgets. So the Money Bills Amendment Procedures Act does give Parliament the ability to either accept, reject, or question the budget that is being presented to them. Now, having said that, the public policy cycle and the public finance cycle is quite an in-depth cycle which takes place over a period of time where various stakeholders interrogate that process. We need now to also think about the intergovernmental fiscal relations system, the division of revenue bill system, which essentially allocates budgets across the three spheres of government. Now, as legislatures, the role there is to look at the allocation. How efficient is it? The idea is to ensure that the budget is balanced, speaks to the needs of the people, and speaks to our economic realities. Now, we have to acknowledge as well that government has made strides in the past few years with regards to legislation, policies, and at some level, the implementation of the national agenda on gender mainstreaming. However, as the Financial and Fiscal Commission, we have found that there is still a lot to be done. It's still not adequate. What have we found out? And what do we mean that is not adequate? So there is a concept of gender responsive budgeting. It is not a separate budget for women. It is not an additional budget Is it the same budget of the country? But the budget in this instance, it must be sensitive to the needs of women. Gender responsive budgeting as well, look at integrating a clear gender perspective within the overall context of the budget process. It also ensures that the needs of men and women are recognized and the budget is inclusive. So, what is the current status then of gender responsive budgeting? So we know that the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities developed the gender responsive planning and budgeting framework, which was a result of the inadequacies which were found in the initial gender responsive budgeting. What has been found now is that, yes, we do have a framework, it's in place, but to what extent is this framework being implemented? So we have found that there is a lack of gender mainstreaming and women empowerment that is continuing to result in gender inequality. We have weak translation of gender equality commitments into fiscal commitments. And departments in their budgets and in their plans, they have not been coherent in actually demonstrating how they are addressing gender equality. So how do we know this? That departments have actually not been able to demonstrate how they are implementing gender equality. So in 2022, the Financial and Fiscal Commission worked very closely with the National Council of Provinces. And we went around the country reviewing the progress on the Women's Charter, because there were commitments which were made previously on implementing this. So we went to all the provinces and we looked at their plans. Why was that important? Because the provinces, through the Premier's offices, they are responsible for implementing the strategies, the plans of the departments. So as the FFC, we assisted the National Council of Provinces to actually analyze the budgets of key departments. We looked at health, we looked at social development, we looked at education. Why were these departments important? Because 80%, almost 80% of government expenditure lies within basic education, health, and social development. And these departments could be a powerful catalyst for changing gender inequalities. So what did we find? We found that the strategic plans and the development plans and the APPs of the various departments, while they have targets and they had commitments and they did show some achievement, most of these achievements, it was not disaggregated by gender. So while we can see that there are some achievements, they've met their targets, but it was difficult to tell whether women were actually benefiting from the progress. We also found that whilst at the Premier's office level, they will have the plans at a strategic level, these plans did not cascade down to the lower levels. So even though they will explain that they prioritize gender transformation, they prioritize equity at a high level. But when you actually look at the granular level, there is no real implementation. So there is inconsistencies. That's what we found. So key things we found that even though there is some achievement, we do not know whether the women have achieved. We also found that the plans were very high level. They were not granular. Now, having said that, the other important fact that I wanted to put across is how, which is a point my colleague from Stats SA raised, that we have the data. Yeah, have the information is out there, but it is not disaggregated properly. And we have not reached a point where we have institutionalized reporting on gender. So the problem here then is capacity building. We need to train, we need to capacitate the bureaucrats to be able to produce reports which speak to this. Over and above that, we also need to be deliberate as well to capacitate political and administrative leadership to be able to interrogate the strategic plans that are presented to them, to look at these plans to say, where is gender? Where are the women's issues? So legislatures then have the power and the authority to be able to describe how these reports are presented to them, and also how the data and gender is actually positioned. They have the power to do that. So that oversight role is very important to ensure that these commitments are met. I think I'll pause there for now.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists. I want to just get some guidance from the program director in terms of time, because I know that we had initially been allocated an hour and a half, and I'm not sure now with the shift of the program, how much of time we have for participation from the floor. We have 15 minutes left. Okay. So I'm going to try and raise a couple of questions first, and then open to the floor for some questions. And I think that we're going to be realistic, that we're not going to be able to answer all the questions now, but there's panels throughout the day. For example, the questions around gender responsive budgets. There's an entire panel at the end of tomorrow, I think, that's going to be dealing with that. So we don't have to try and deal with everything now. But I think I'd just like to flag a few things for parliaments and legislatures that has come out from all of this. The one is, and I'll start with the last presentation around the gender responsive budgets monitoring and evaluation assessment framework. And just to raise a question around that for legislatures to look at government's adoption of that framework, the framework adopted by government, and whether that framework is the framework that meets the needs of gender transformation in our country. To critically interrogate that, to hold public hearings on the framework, to be able to understand what is the framework that is needed by the people of our country, by the poorest people of our country, by the majority of women in our country, to be able to really effectively ensure change in the system. So I think before we just talk about implementation, I think we must ask, has Parliament and legislatures undergone that process? Because your role is that of oversight and public participation. Not just about implementing things blindly. It's about interrogating them and ensuring that they address the Constitution. So in terms of the Constitution, in terms of gender responsive budgeting frameworks, critical thing is that we have a Constitution which is really strong on socioeconomic rights, which talks about equality, about dignity, about freedom, about social justice. But the economic system that we have has to be interrogated. The economic policy priorities have to be interrogated into whether they're actually meeting and capable of meeting the Constitution. And that's Parliament's job. That is a critical part of Parliament's job, is to look at what is needed to effect and implement the Constitution. That's the key point of accountability. So I'd like you to look at that. I'd like you to look at, and for us to perhaps have some discussion around that. And then one of the other things is the question of when we're looking at departments. So if you're looking at health, social development, education, critical. But to be able to have the kinds of resources you need in the budget itself, you have to look. And the budget, as we, I was the person in 1994 that proposed South Africa develop gender responsive budget in the national budget debates. And in that Hansard record, you will see that it is linked to how do you first start with your macroeconomic policy choice that decides the size of the pie. Because the budget we had pre-94 catered to approximately 2 million people in our country. Budget immediately post-94, how does it increase? How did it change to address the needs of approximately 45 million then and now? So what's the interrogation of the macroeconomic policy choices that decide the size of the pie? Otherwise, you have trade-offs and cut-offs. So for example, you had trade-offs in the first parliament around cutting off teacher training colleges, mental health care institutions. And that's short-term thinking. Gender responsive budgets develops long-term thinking. Short-term in the context of long-term. So for you to talk more about that and to think more about that, what's the long-term consequences of those cuts been for society as a whole? The issue of the regulation of business and 115 businesses pledging commitment to work with government, critical. But work with how and on what? There's a study on public-private partnerships that's been done by Dawn, the Third World Feminist Network, that shows the impact of public-private partnerships in relation to particular parts of our continent where they've been implemented, and those have been very negative. So when you look at the companies that are listed, BP, Shell, for example, the two first ones, are heavily implicated globally in terms of climate change and the climate crisis that we face. Accountability must mean enforceability. It cannot just be voluntary. It has to be enforced compliance. You cannot have just a situation of saying it's a nice to have. Because businesses, bottom line is the bottom line.
Yeah.
Their objectives is profit. Your objective is the Constitution of South Africa and the people of South Africa. So before opening for any more questions, I think I'm going to ask for comments and questions from the floor, and then we'll conclude.
Thank you very much to our panelists. We have to break at 2:15, but we are going to take 3 questions or comments, and I'm going to spread it. It will be yeah. Halala. I was going to say 1 this side and 1 in the middle and 1 over there. If we are going to meet our target of 15 minutes. And pardon me that because I don't know the names, I don't like pointing a finger at people, but I don't have a choice at this point in time. And I'm going to take the first hand that went up over there. Yes, sir.
Greetings to the city. No, my question is specifically to Ms. Pinaido, Commission for Gender Equality. Firstly, I would like to ask, do you think we should still consider it as gender equality? Because equality means you've got people who are already on level 7 and you've got people who are on level 1, and you are giving both the individuals the same thing. Why don't we then focus it on equity? Because equity means you are taking the individual that is from level 1 and making them equivalent to the individual in level 7. After then we can speak of gender or we can speak of equality. Because for as far as I'm concerned, I certainly believe that we will never reach equality. Hence, we still have people in different levels. When, for example, one has got R1 million and you've got funds of 100,000 that needs to go to somebody that has got only 10 rand, you're going to give that person the same amount with a person that has got R1 million. So I think the mindset needs to change. We should focus on equity instead of equality. When finishing with equity, we then focus on equality because everyone is on the same level. I thank you.
Thank you. Let me take you, sir, in the middle.
No, thank you very much. My name is Kanya Ceza. I serve in the Portfolio Committee for Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs in Parliament. And I'm a legislator. And I think that as legislators, we're going to have to persuade for now the legislation to change in terms of the emancipation of all. Because by emancipating everybody, you emancipate women. And what then happens is that when you do so, you allow the equalitarianism to exist, which is now not something that is favorable in this society. We are here to disrupt that system that actually renders women useless, render gendered persons as suspects, because Steve Biko puts it clear in I Write White I Like when he says that at the workplace, a black man is dehumanized. He goes to the toilet and comes back and collects himself for the master. And then when he goes back to where he stays, and then Frantz Fanon, of course, puts it later on, the disparities between the streets of the urban areas and the rural areas where black men meet. He comes back there and he is an animal because of the dehumanization that he gets from there. So my question is, how do you make sure that you arrest the dehumanization that happens at a workplace as a result of economic deprivation into ensuring that violence, even in the current state, Vladimir Lenin puts a state violence as such, that the kind of violence that we're getting under a capitalist system as currently under the state is the kind of system that perpetuates those inequalities and awakens the perpetual inequalities. And so it is quite curious as panelists to say that we must speak on these issues without acknowledging the fact that patriarchy, a patriarchal society as we have now, is the one that gives birth to the kind of hate that we are seeing in terms of xenophobia, in terms of homophobia, in terms of tribalism, in terms of religious and cultural intolerance. We are opposed to any cultural and religious practices such as Ubutwala and all those that pertain to dehumanizing women in society. And so the emancipation of women is the emancipation of everybody first in terms of economic emancipation. And until we speak to the industrialization and the disparities pertaining to the development of the rural areas that perpetuates the rurality of those areas, then we are not going to make any impact in terms of emancipation. Thank you very much.
You see, even if I wanted to be generous in terms of hands, once you take more time, you are depriving those that could have, gotten an opportunity. I'm going to take you, madam, over there. Yes, you. Yes. Can we be short and precise because of time? The roving mic, please.
Working. Is it working? Yes. Now it's fine.
Please proceed, ma'am. The microphone.
Hello. Okay, now, greetings to all the facilitators. My name is Mohita. Basis of this gender summit, I found it necessary also bring the aspect of men as well. Much better. To also bring the aspect of men into the discussion as well. We are speaking about gender challenges. And part of what has incited me to raise my hand was when we speak about the societal skills, particularly relating to gender-based violence and femicide. What are we doing to ensure that men who are abused at home get the necessary mental help? Because we can speak on the basis of providing a safe house for women who are abused. But why must a woman leave her home and her children when she is abused in her own home? Why can't we have rehabilitation centers for men to go so that when they come back home, they are properly rehabilitated and we stop the process of happening again? I agree that we do have good policies, but we are lacking with implementation. And it needs us to be unapologetic and set down rules and regulations about what exactly do we have in our APPs in our financial years for the full financial year. But Speaker, I think looking at how from where women has come, we must also look at the cultural aspect. As much as we look at the societal aspect, it begins at home. How do we teach our kids, our boys, that cooking and cleaning is not a woman's job, but it can be something that they learn from small age, so that when you go to them being an adult, you are not addressing the societal issue at a later stage. It's just those one points that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My panelists, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take 3 more hands, 1 minute each. I'll start with you, sir. Are we fine? Are you fine? Okay.
Well overdone.
You can go, ma'am.
Okay. Again, my name is Usazwa Ajali. My question would be, why are we still speaking of a man and a woman when we're speaking of gender? Because gender is more than that. Whenever we started the day, we did mention that there are more than 2 genders, and right now we are speaking of numbers of women and men, and we're looking at the budgets and we're looking at the stats, and we forget that there's a huge spectrum that is left out whenever we're speaking of gender. And economically, we cannot put in women and leaving other genders. If we're speaking of the 50-50 tendencies that we need in all platforms, what about the people who doesn't conform to being a man and a woman? Are we saying they are not part of South Africa while the Constitution are protecting them? Just wanted to remind you of that, and then please respond on that numbers. Thank you.
I'm going to take you, madam. Yes. 1 minute, please.
Sanbonan. Thank you, Sazi, for that. I think really in our conversation, we really need to gear ourselves up towards moving away from heteronormativity, because it seems like we are, in essence, isolating particular individual groups and communities, but we aim to be inclusive. I mean, to begin with the panel, it would have been nice to see a lesbian representation, a transgender representative, a disabled representative to speak about the plights of women in these spaces. The other one is just a thought to throw out there. Our contentions and our lot of challenges are based around gender. How do we begin to visualize a genderless society? Perhaps really it's about removing the construct that confines us to recreate a new paradigm altogether, one that is not premised on inequality, one that is not premised around structures, but one that is premised around humanity, around just embracing individuality. Because I promise you, if it's time to release budget, we're going to have a budget for transgender, lesbian, straight men, women, cisgender men. It becomes a whole chaos. But perhaps we may need to put the lens on saying, what could a genderless or a non-binary or a fluid society could look like? It's something that perhaps during the course of these 3 days, we may want to consider in changing the status quo.
Thank you. My fellow delegates, because of time, what we are proposing is that can we put whatever we have down, and we are going to provide the email address from the technical staff, so that when we do our overview, then those matters that should have been raised will then be taken care of, because I have to allow my panelists to respond. Thank you.
Can I?
Thanks very much for all of those contributions. And I think to reiterate the importance of not actually presenting in the way in which we speak a heteronormativity, which I think perhaps has been has come across, and I think it's probably not the intention of any of us. So I think it's to accept that point, which is a critical one. And I think the issue of actually looking beyond the binaries is critical. And what's the lens that we're using to be able to do that? So the word I normally use, I mean, the analysis I normally give is a feminist analysis, which looks at gender in terms of understanding how do we move beyond the binaries, the stereotypes, the ways in which people are confined, and the way in which power is used to undermine our humanity. And I think that in terms of the understanding then, how do we see everyone? How do we see people's humanity? And I think the issue that we started with was the recognition of our inherent dignity, and that is our birthright, and that how society imposes different labels and different roles and relationships of power, and how those operate on the economic, the political, and the social. We didn't perhaps delve into as great an extent the social impacts and the social, and I hope that that will be carried forward in the other panels to come. We started with, and from my side, I'd like to just ask each of the panelists to perhaps for quick, not necessarily a response, but a reflection as we close this the session. Could I ask?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. From my side, I just want to say that, yes, it's not our intention to be specific on women. I echo the sentiments of Madam Moderator. If any offenses was caused, please do accept apologies, but that was not our intention. Engagement with stakeholders plays such a vital role in any institution, let alone a Chapter 9 institution like the Commission for Gender Equality. We are inviting our stakeholders to engage with us. Let us work to achieve gender transformation and gender equity along all provinces and all levels of governments. The question from the floor was gender equity versus equality. The question has been posed to the Commission on many, many levels, and I'm going to engage with you once I'm done to show you what would necessitate and what we would have to achieve and the changes that would be involved should we decide to move from equality to equity. And you're more than welcome to engage with me after the session.
Okay, from the statistics point of view, with regards to, I like that we move away from this binaries, and one person from the session down on there indicated that I really like that. Why don't you talk of humanity? Because this is going to eliminate this racism, the whatever, because we are not identifying people. Humanity, you talk of people being equal. This is a human being, this is a human being, doesn't look at color, which I think it's going to take some time. I know within Statistics South Africa, now we are having talks with regards to when coming to disaggregations, we include the community LGBTQI+. So from measurement, there are talks. We want to move to including them when we disaggregate our statistics. And I would really love to see where we're going to go to a point when statistics, we're just addressing it at humanity level. So that level would know that nobody will be identified by the way they appear, they look, and what they believe in, and so forth, but will just be human beings, and I think that will be great to move towards. Thank you.
So as I reflect, I go back to Madam Moderator's words right at the beginning, where you stated that the system was created by design.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to avoid designing the same system again, we're going to have to use a different approach in creating the new system. And I really believe that we need to move towards co-creation, right? That even move towards creating the new gender strategy, there are people that have been left out of this room. The Commission of Gender Equality is here. The Department of Women, Youth and Disability and Persons Living with Disabilities is here. UN Women is here. But what about UNFPA that concentrates on sexual and reproductive health and rights? What about the Department of Social Development that looks at issues such as teenage pregnancy and other issues that involve women, poverty, and vulnerability amongst our populations? What about the Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Response Fund? If one of the mandates is to deal with GBVF, then they have to be here in the room because they deal with the money, right? That was given by the presidency to deal with GBVF. We need to have stakeholders, NGOs that will represent civic society in all of these areas. Okay? We need to have business. We need to have communities. The unfortunate thing is that we don't know the experience that the rural woman is going through in Kumbu. We don't know her experience. And she needs to be here, or we need to ensure that she is represented in some way in the room to ensure that when we are creating the new gender strategy, her voice is included. So we need a new approach. And we don't mind as the National Planning Commission to be part of that approach. But we need to change the way we are doing things. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think the point that I want to put across is that because we are operating in an environment of fiscal prudence, fiscal consolidation, we need to be aware that we have rights which are protected in the Constitution, socioeconomic rights, the right to healthcare, right to education, and also for the state to provide a social welfare net for the vulnerable. So as the legislature, when you interrogate the budget, you must ensure that the budget protects social welfare, healthcare, and education, because those rights are protected and those rights covers the vulnerable. I think that is the power that legislatures have to ensure that the budget is equitable and protects the most vulnerable of our people. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to all the panelists. And I'd like to end with going back to what the Honorable Speaker for KZN raised in relation to honoring Comrade Victoria Mkenge. And I'd like to read a little bit about her, just a few words. I learned much from the women I worked with and experienced sisterhood and solidarity, not just from those who are my age, but with older women such as Victoria Mkenge and Florence McKees. In July 1985, Victoria Mkenge was assassinated by apartheid agents outside her home as she unpacked groceries from her car in front of her children. When I first heard of her death, I thought it couldn't be true. The image of her laughing a few days earlier flitted through my mind. We just finished a Natal Organization of Women's Working Committee meeting in her office and were in the street downstairs. Victoria wore large spectacles that covered most of her face and had a belly laugh that wrinkled up her eyes, a wonderfully loud, open laugh. None of us realized that we were laughing a slow goodbye. So to return to the question, what would she have wanted us to do? And what would she have said about the killing of Comrade Fikile Mshangasi in rural KwaZulu-Natal, an environmental and climate justice activist who was shot and killed in in front of her own children? What would she have wanted you all to do? Thank you so much. And I've really enjoyed this panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much to our moderator and the panelists. Honorable delegates, the email address, you've removed it. It was on the screen. That is the email address we can use to submit our inputs and questions so that they can form part of the overview when we do it. Time is a very important resource. We must use it effectively. If we have to be back after an hour, for us to be able to get enough time, we must do as such. I'm going to request the Deputy Chairperson of the NCOP and Speaker August of the Eastern Cape Legislature to come and help me give some gifts to our panelists.
Nice meeting you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
You like to exchange numbers, you must.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you. Yes. Honorable delegates, we now break for lunch. It's 14:35 and we'll be back at 15:30 on the dot to proceed with the next session. I thank you. We are coming back at 3:30. Our topic for this session.
Questions around gender responsive budgets. There's start of a deck.
These areas, okay? We need to have business. We need to have community.
This is SM Radio. Enjoy.
Go on. Forget you. Help me, and it takes.
Last night, when I tell my last night, when I tell my the child, the child, the child, I will not go up, tell each other like the child,
6 days on 7 pairs of glasses. I'd like to ask Chief Director of Public Intelligence with the address that question. From the perspective of statistics that we look at in terms of public intelligence, but mostly in terms of looking at inequality, we have to look at, well, we have to look at geography and how increase the concern how does it require unemployment and precariously for that system to work? It's not just that it's by accident. I desire that globally, precarious employment amongst women has increased across the world, not just in our country. So Stats SA, over to you in relation to
I wanna take you on a trip to Africa. You are my lady, you are my lady, my number one lady. You are my lady. Oh, how I love you, how I need you, Angelina. You are my lady, you are my lady, my number one lady. You are my lady, you are my lady. Build a family together, Angelina. I love you under the arm. Don't you know it? Don't you know it? Hey, Angelina, mercy, oh, Reina. Angelina, mercy, oh, Reina. Don't you know I love you? Don't you know I need your love? Yeah. Matwale, usinda wa mranda. Matwale, usinda wa mranda. Matwale, usinda wa mranda. Matwale, usinda wa mranda. Gidila wandarandale, sistema tata amotimaka. Gidila wandarandale, sistema tata amotimaka. Mamele umbu, taleri unkalo hetsi. Haramala peku, yoro balana heri. If I see the dignity, come we say habusu. Akubana, kwakuba sarelane. Sistema tata amotimaka. Elan, 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 Elan. Jojo vinagi wala pasi sotu. Jojo vinagi wala pomunati. Jojo vinagi wala bobo hali. Jojo vinagi wala pasi sotu. Utaue, letaue, lenwele, taba, utaue, ohuti, letaue, Jojo vinagi wala pasi sotu. Tonto bina yirala munati. Bohali. Tonto bina yirala bohali. Tonto bina. Tonto bina. Tonto bina. Tonto bina ugaibo. Tonto bina ugai. Tonto bina ugaibo. Tonto bina ugai. Voilà. Mabele go nwana ra ditlhaku thabisa dihoho o panya o tswa ka moroko ga ile kgale ke theosala mangotswana ke ntse ko batla ke sa o bone ba re kgomase ga ngwa ke basetsana thokwana tswetse motswelo mogolo mme mmangwane mo hatsang tate kgomang tate o e hametse kae ba re pelwana madi jwa mpolae ga ke bolawa ko wena nka thaba mabele dumela kotswana dithota ke re kgale go tlhomelela diphako ro tebelela ditsie re potisana le serwebela ga ra tsile wena mabele Ella, Are ke le pheri tshwana la ka matlole ka re ke sireletsa ka lo ka monyako ebile ke sireletsa le ka tshari ya ngwana ke re ke nna letlala la mabengunong ke se ke reng ka o pera bona hey ela o mo le ba bona o mo le ba ke bona ha ke ana jwala ke le mo le ha ke ana yo maleleme ela Impoma, ime, impoma, leleme, impoma, leleme, impoma. Hey, ela. No sete na hakisosmo. Panse kisamusadi, panse kisanguaka. Bansha bagatulat, ela kere kama hete, kama hete, kama hete, kama hete, kama hete. Hey, kiwa hona kapinu ya bushu, noya kainwa sana kiri, le mai kuto. Pino ya kainwa sana 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 le mai kuto. How no niki, 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 how no niki. Are ke se fenyane sa motswa magabane se fenyane sa thuwa matlomeng yako Abukaka salera musala ba re kwena mama go kubi mama poaba. Mama rwala nyoko ya mutinyane. Ba to me, Baba to my momo tapping. La bolaya matale. Ba to me, Baba to my momo tapping. La bolaya matale. Bolaya matale. Baba take up to an lady proposing. La bolaya matale. Baba take up to an Ba to me, Baba to Mabu Mutabi. It's the Labolaya Masale. Ba to me, Baba to Mabu Mutabi. It's the Labolaya Masale. It's the Labolaya Masale. Baba Teta, Batwana Didi Fobi. Isiki la bolaya matale. Baba teta batwana lilu batu. Yeah. Sino te yonna yonna batu. Yeah. Sino te yonna yonna batu. Yeah. See, get out of life, at some sort I'm a teacher, I'm some night. Fly up, I'm I try to lie. I just but when I did it, I am my talent. Nobody. Mamu, Susana yale nato. Ronya na mama, shilisi. Maburi mutana. Susana yale rato. Nana ifama, shilisi. Bigile la wana. Mutala wale pate. Nonya na ifama, shilisi. Bigile la wana. Mutala wale pate. Nonya na ifama, shilisi. Amuri Susana yale Ronya na ifama Shilisi Mamuri rimota Susana yale rato Ronya na ifama Shilisi La wana Mutala wale para Ronya na ifama Akala, oh mama, put that away, Akala, Akala, oh, never fancy bed, Akala, oh, Matuda, Bakala, what's the whichever Kaliswahili, oh, Matuda, oh, nothing, but if I catch a lot of fuzzies, beg, sit. I would not be them Kuma. Yoko was an EP. I'm a possible silver. We know what other or what's it called. Salatega, where I got the papelane. Oh, Patuta, Osupaga Mrs. Sanda Sakusha, young Kako. What the fool was he? So, what do you want to know? I'm securely good for the beat. Securely for my beat. Securely for my beat. Basa Kelika. Basi Pele Telizika. Nani abespaza. Roni pani abesis. Ekumbu lukuti ngapate kwa wale watu. Kanti nati abantu besikise. Sikumbu lukuti ngapate kwa asikwatu kupinga. Asipuni. Annabelle, Emily, it's gotta keep it in mind. Woman ain't property. Just like you and me, she's got feelings. When she tell you no, show her the courtesy. Oh, but all that, nothing. A woman is an entity, she's got a right to be. Oh, but all that, nothing. Give her freedom and equality, she's got the right to come. Who doesn't copy? The chickens and dog. Let me follow my chicken. Was so content. Say to my daughter. Pass the story, penny. I'm a possible. Oh, but all that. Bakalaga was so much of a Kaliswahili. Oh, but all that. Give her freedom and equality, she's got the right to be. Oh, but all that. A woman is an entity, she's got a right to be. Oh, but that's enough. Give her freedom and equality, she's got the right to be. To be. Woman got a right to be.
Umapefani, mapefani, walirime shute. Umapefani, umapefani, mapefani, walirime shute. Umapefani, umapefani, mapefani, walirime shute. Umapefani. Umapefani, walirime shute. Umapefani. Umapefani, umapefani, walirime shute. Umapefani, 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 walirime shute. Umapefani,
The world changes, revolutionaries die, and the children forget. The ghetto is our first love, and our dreams are drenched in gold. We don't even cry. We don't even cry about it no more. Are the beautiful ones really dead? Nizilibelo manisaga ngoma. Nizilibelo manisaga ngoma nina. Nizilibelo manisaga ngoma. Nizilibelo manisaga ngoma nina. The world changes, revolutionaries die, and the children forget. Children forget. Ghetto is our first love, and our dreams are drenched in gold. We don't even cry. We don't even cry. We don't even cry about it no more. We don't even cry. Beautiful ones are really dead. Now in Monday,
My sins were higher than the mountain when the Lord sanctified me. My sins were higher than the mountain when the Lord sanctified me. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. When the fire came down, when the fire came down, glory, hallelujah. Oh, 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 when the Lord.
Otherwise,
My sins were deeper than the ocean when the Lord sanctifies me. My sins were deeper than the ocean when the Lord sanctified me. Let's go to the chart. Sing, glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. And the fire came down. Can we be ready to start in a minute? Can you ask people who are outside? We are starting. We are not waiting for anybody else who's not here yet. We are going to start. Yeah. Please close the doors so that we can start properly. And those of you standing at the doors, please come in. And those who are having tea outside, you can drink tea inside the hall. There's no restrictions about that. My name is Lichisa Tenudi. I'm just correcting the chairperson of the NCOP that I understand why he calls me. This is Lichisa, unlike everybody else who's introduced with his name and his surname. Now, let me remind you, there's a person from the Seychelles who came to Parliament the other day, and he had trouble, firstly, getting through the airports and so on, because his name was just one. They wanted his name. Said, no, we don't have that in my country. So you are turning me into him today. That's why I was protesting that he do include the same name. In the radio debates about things in our politics, someone from KZN wanted to know, where is Comrade Lichisa? They asked him, who's that? Lichisa, where UDF? Because of people like Braham, you only introduced me with one name. I thought I will make a few remarks, both as a way of introducing the theme, part reacting on one or two things that was said earlier. That I'll complete it when I wrap up things later today. And that is that the theme as written out there is an overview of progress made in parliaments, advancing gender transformation. Now, this is a part of the broader theme in our country. Our vision contained in the Constitution says we must build a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic, and hopefully prosperous society. Now, if we put that as an objective of every one of our activity, this is absolutely crucial. Today, the focus is on building a non-sexist society, and thus the requirements for transformation. But it is also related to democracy. You can't say you are democratic when over half of the population has serious discriminatory practices in some statute, but especially in practices in society. So that when we draw our plans for increasing, as the overall theme suggests, not just planning, but allocation of resources, budgeting for gender transformation is a crucial part. So there's an interconnectedness and integration of themes that we must hold dear. And as we go through the next 3 days, we must keep that track of their interrelatedness. Let me start by introducing the moderator firstly. The
our host secretary of the legislature here, Nerusha Naidu, who is a law graduate, practiced as an attorney of the High Court of South Africa from 1996 to 2001, served as senior legal advisor to KZN legislature in the past, and was appointed the first ombudsperson, ombudsperson and head of investigations at the eThekwini municipality. Appointed in 2005 as secretary of the KwaZulu-Natal legislature. Now, her claim to fame is also that she's the longest serving secretary in the legislative sector. Won't say no if you buy her a bicycle, to that credit. And of course, she sits on the South African Parliamentary Institute, chair. And then, of course, our host speaker, Honorable Boyce, a former teacher. You can see how she speaks with gestures, like the Speaker of the National Assembly. You know, people who have taught before, you can see them as they go around their job. The gesture. Senior education specialist for youth development in the Department of Education, was part of SATU Executive Committee at Ezingolweni. She was sworn in 2014 as a member of the KZN Provincial Legislature and deployed in 2016 as Chief Whip of the ANC. Following 2019 elections, Boyce was elected the Speaker of the KwaZulu-Natal Provincial Legislature. He was appointed in 2023 to serve in the Parliamentary Institute. Then, of course, the home of legends, Speaker, Honorable Helen Mercedes Stolz August. It's good to know you are Mercedes. Absolute top class. Top class. The current Speaker of the Eastern Cape Provincial Legislature and elected in May 2019. He previously served as the MEC for Human Settlements and for Health. She's also former councillor of the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan Municipality and former Speaker of the Nelson Mandela Municipality. He was MEC for Human Settlements in 2010 to 2018, that's a specific number. And then, of course, Ms. Tlengwa, who's a member of Parliament since 2019, serving in the Portfolio Committee of Health and of the Committee on Women, Youth, and Persons with Disabilities, and of course of the Multi-Party Women's Caucus in Parliament. He's former Deputy Chairperson of the Women's Brigade in Ulundi, KwaZulu-Natal. These are our panelists and the moderator. So I will now hand over to you, moderator, to proceed with the program.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker Tsunodi. It really is an honor to be here today to discuss such an important topic as the progress that we have made in advancing gender transformation in parliaments. I'm very fortunate and that I'm with honorable speakers from the Eastern Cape Legislature, from the KZN Legislature, and the Deputy Chairperson of the Women's Caucus from Parliament. What makes me particularly happy to moderate this session is being a secretary in the legislature, led by a women speaker, being a female secretary. I own that. There's another female secretary, Ms. Nomawetu Ngakani from the Eastern Cape Legislature. So the two speakers that sit here today are really walking the talk. Let's give them a round of applause. They chose to work with women secretaries. So on the vein of what we have done as parliaments to advance gender transformation, we need to reflect panelists on the internal workings of Parliament, what we do internally, but I think it goes beyond that. It goes beyond what is Parliament in relation to its role. We're preaching to the converted here. Everyone understands Parliament and the legislatures, that we make laws, they must be effective laws, that we are exercising robust oversight, that we are involving the public in our processes. So how does the SDG goals, the targets, how are they being realized internally and externally? And when we talk about quotas, how are we giving effect to those quotas? Are they meaningful? Do they do anything in driving the institution? So I just want to hear, and I think the audience wants to hear from the experiences of the legislatures, the experience of parliaments. I'm going to give Honorable Sauls August the first bite, and we'll try and take it as a casual conversation, meaning that I can change it and ask Parliament the same thing, and ask Speaker of KZN Legislature the same, or we can just interchange questions. But let's talk about quotas.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Naidu. I think when you come to the issue of quotas, I think it's important to understand that there you have an external environment and then you have the internal environment. Now, from a political perspective, because everybody who's in Parliament must understand there is a political process due to the Constitution that prescribes how you get into Parliament. So that is first and foremost. So we know that the biggest political party, which is the African National Congress, drives a very particular policy with respect to the issue of 50-50. And you can see that in the Eastern Cape Provincial Legislature, there has been a transcendence from 1994 to the issue in the 2000s when we fought for the issue of 30% into parliaments and into the local government space. Now we are moving into the sphere of 50-50, ensuring that in a particular political party's list that you have that 50-50. It is unfortunate that in that policy and in that lobbying of the gender mainstreaming, that other political parties are not yet there, that predominantly the lists are being led by one major political party in the legislatures as well as in Parliament, and you can also see it at the local government. So when we talk about the different spheres, we must not also forget what is playing out in the local government sphere in that respect. So I think one of the issues that you can see is that, yes, there is a step and a move towards that, as well as the bill that is now in front being discussed, the issue of making it a constitutional impact, a legal impact, to ensure that there is then 50-50 within the list that is there. But when you come to the internal environment, if you look at the Eastern Cape, now we are sitting at presiding officers having a 50-50 presentation. You are sitting now at 21. We have 21 portfolio and standing committees. And out of that, we have a 50% that is headed also by female MPLs as well as males. And then also in terms of the WIPRI. So there is gradually, there's been an uptake in terms of an understanding that women no longer have to beg for their space within the Eastern Cape Provincial Legislature, within government as a whole, that there is now a natural, shall we just say, an upward mobility for women to ascend the political ladder. And I think what is also important is that what has happened after 2019, for the first time in South Africa, there has been a, shall we call it, an understanding or an appreciation that where males have been chosen as premiers, there, one of the major political parties once again stepped in very proactively to say, where there's a male, let us then have a female speaker. And I think you can see the sector is currently predominated. And I think that is why you have such vigorous policies and programs and public participation that is taking place. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Speaker Sauls August. Speaker Boyce, if we can just look at the same issue around quotas, and but really zoom into the issue around SDGs being used to ensure gender equity. What role can women in legislatures play to push toward the desired transformation?
Thank you, Nopala, and greetings to the House. I think for women in Parliament, we have to firstly achieve what has been outlined by Speaker August in terms of having equal representation. In fact, ensuring that it is a prerequisite, whether it's through the Electoral Act or the Constitution. So I believe that women in Parliament or legislatures as the enactors of laws, during the process of amendment of the electoral laws, we might have snoozed already in the recent amendment that was forced by the court. But I always believe that we have greater space to move for the amendment of the Electoral Act in South Africa to be inclusive in terms of the requirements, include the issue of quotas across parties, because there's no way that we can think that it will always happen because we pray harder that it happens, or we hope that someone would come from elsewhere and go to political parties and make the men and women in political parties to see that it needs to happen. This I say because the majority of members of parties, political parties in South Africa are women. If they are unable to enforce policy change in their political parties, when they come into those corridors and take the oath of office, in terms of the constitution of the country, they have to move for better legislation. But also what they also need to have is a change of attitude. I think that sometimes we feel that there is a big threat coming, either through the young or through women, to take over our space, or that we may lose relevance when we have more women. Nontembeko might wake up not being the face of women. It's known that at my age I'm not young. But it might be nice to be called a young woman because I'm relatively younger than my colleagues in the space. So when we change the attitudes and know that the creation and occupation of spaces needs those that are already in the space, because the spaces are created by those that were before them. It's not like we will be inventing something. People created the spaces. I mean small things. By being accommodative also in the standing rules that we adopt when we go there. For instance, most of the time we find that the issue of the accouchement leave or maternity leave, it's something that we find it as if it's something foreign to even think about in Parliament. The issue of providing for childcare facilities, because when we continue to not provide for childcare facilities, we are driving women who are still of childbearing age away from Parliament, because they would think that when I go there, I stand to change my entire lifestyle and the life, including the type of working hours that we adopt. That cannot be done by someone in a political party outside the Parliament environment, but it needs all of us there. But lastly, Chair, when we are doing that, we must move with the times, especially to the issues of the non-binaries, to be knowing that when we are speaking by quotas, we must also think about persons with disabilities, but also understand that we need to push laws that will affirm women in terms of the gender that they want to belong in. As women parliamentarians, adopt budgets that will make it possible for women to have access to specialized reproductive health, so that it does not become a privilege of a few. That can be done by women who adopt the budget led by the Women's Caucus, but inside the Parliament and the legislatures of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Boyce. I think that then takes us to the issue of the Women's Caucus, particularly Deputy Chair of the Women's Caucus of Parliament, because that role of the Women's Caucus is to drive the agenda of women to empower women in Parliament, but also to have an impact outside of Parliament. So can you share with us the current empowerment programs that you have in Parliament, and do they yield the desired outcomes, do you think? I think for us, we must be realistic. We are 29 years into democracy. There are things that we've done right, and there are things we haven't done well, and we must be able to say these are the areas we need to improve on, because we're moving into the 7th term. We want to have a strategy that we would leave for the 7th term. And so where there are gaps, let's fill those gaps, but share with us honestly what's going on in Parliament.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I greet you, my honorable speaker. First of all, in the Parliament, there are many parties. Now, Parliament are particularly important institutions that must show the democratic landscape of a country. This places an obligation of parliaments to reflect democratic transformation, including gender transformation. Parliament can use its various constitutional obligations to ensure transformation, not only for members of parliament, but also for the entire country. For example, the lawmaking process is the constitutional obligation placed on the parliament. Therefore, that is an opportunity to come up with transformed legislation. Parliament also has an obligation to ensure gender transformation within the legislatures. For example, by actively ensure that women members of parliament are actively and effectively taking part in all activities of parliament, including in debates and motions. One of the key strategies adopted by the South Africa National Parliament in advancing gender transformation within is establish the Multi-Party Women's Caucus. The Multi-Party Women's Caucus established in terms of joint roles of parliament and is made up of all women members in parliament, including women ministers for both houses. A dedicated support structure standing for the interest of the concern of all women members of parliament across the political party lines. Also set up to introduce women's perspective and focus on all parliamentary activities, is led by a chairperson elected from the majority part and a deputy chairperson from the opposition part. The Multi-Party Caucus women in South Africa National Parliament has no oversight function over executive, but can make submission to the parliament committees charged with the oversight of women's issues. In addition, the Multi-Party Women Caucus is also of a multi-party committees tasked with the overseeing implementation of national strategy on gender-based violence and femicide. The advance of having women cabinet ministers as members of the Multi-Party Women Caucus has proven to be fruitful, because the Multi-Party Women's Caucus is also able to engage with all departments despite not having an oversight function. The presence of women cabinet ministers when Deciding about focus areas for the term is also greatly beneficial for the multi-party caucus. When it comes to transformation, the use of resources must be considered. Having an unfunded structure can be detrimental. The establishment of multi-party caucus would not be noted as gender transformation progress if it was not empowered to work. For the South African National Parliament to be able to execute its mandate, function, the issue of resources become vital. The MPWC is supported by a committee secretary, a committee assistant, a researcher, a content advisor. There was a time when a multi-party women's caucus struggled to host its activity as there was no formal given time. Now, the multi-party women's caucus has decided time slot to meet and conduct its activity once a month. In conclusion, the multi-party women's caucus is set up to ensure that all women members of parliament across the political party lines are empowered and supported to stay longer and thrive in politics, and to be exemplar model for young women who aspire to be in politics. The above mentioned is among noted achievements within the South African National Parliament. There are other achievements by the South African National Parliament, including the number of women who are chairperson of this parliamentary committee. We have 21 women members of chairperson of committees out of 51. I thank you.
"21 out of 51, we're getting there. I think it's, as we land on that point, there's another issue that we need to consider as we go forward into the 7th term. Of course, we have at this point in time no control over determinations of portfolio committee chairs, but it must be something that we must start deliberating on and trying to steer in a certain direction, because the question arises, yes, when you get to the 50-50, and I want to be clear, I'm not only talking about women and men, I'm talking about non-binary as well. So when we get to the point of being inclusive and we get our quota right, then we have to start asking the deeper questions. Are we now touching the surface? Are we picking those committees that we think other groups can chair? Let me put it that way. Because we're not taking the ones that we think, well, science and technology is often seen as an area, or the area of engineering is for males. So looking at how those portfolios, the spread, we need to start saying for the 7th term, let's shift us in that direction.
That's true.
So I think we're getting there, but we just need to start tapping the right, pressing the right buttons. Yeah.
Yeah, yes. But we are going to move towards that, because so far there are committee who are this energy and this from the engineering are also head by men. But we are moving towards that.
Thank you. So then we move on to the next issue, talking about committees. How can legislatures, Speaker Sauls August, how can legislatures ensure that all committees mainstream gender into the work of their committees so that it does not just become the role of the gender committees and women's caucus? I'm going to throw it to Speaker Boyce after you as well. So I just want two perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think let's first start that already a study was done in 2013 by the Commission for Gender Equality. And they made certain findings that organizations lack to effectively mainstream gender policies as outlined in the National Gender Policy of 2000. That includes the existence of the capacity within the organizations to drive the gender policies. And even where, and they went further to say that even where these do exist, there are no transformation policies